Unlearning Unlimited. Unlearning Unlimited.
Welcome to Unlearned Unlimited. My name is Dr. Sito Narcisse, and we have a banger for you today. I am so honored and humbled to have this brother on the show with us, Dr. Richard Carranza. If you don't know in the educational world, Dr. Carranza, and I'm gonna let him give his story. He started in humbling beginnings, Mexican-American family influence, immigrant from the Latino space. You know, the brothers and the Latinos work so much with sisters trying to impact education across the nation. But the beautiful thing is we are so excited because we wanted to get folks that can tell you about their journey and also talk about the construct of education that happens in the nation. And when things are happening in the country, he's one of the guys that they call to ask their perspective around that. And so we're very, very humbling. And so I wanted to welcome you. Hey, Dr. Carranza, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sito. Just call me Richard. I'm just Richard.
Well, welcome to the show, Richard. We're super glad that you're here on the Unlearning Unlimited Podcast. As you know, the podcast is always set up between the clash between education and culture. So we're always bringing on folks that are doing not only dynamic things, innovation, but also folks talking about the real humanistic approach of what really goes on as they think about the solutions as we move forward around the country and education. I'm going to be talking to you a lot of stuff, but let's do this first. You know, we always love, Richard, to set up to preset folks around the reality of the journey of who they are, where they come from. And so I'm going to say this. So I wanted to start off my whole approach when we were going to interview. I was like, there are, to me, two Richards, right? The one media painted as the radical guy of New York, NYC Chancellor, you know, but there's also the one that grew up as a Mexican-American student, doing great things, started off as a teacher and all those other things. And so I always think we always get the opportunity, to talk about the realness of not only education, but also the realness of the people who work hard to really give opportunity in this country for kids to have a shot to make it. And so whereas the one thing we always say on this show is the people who talk, the best person to give you their bio is themselves. So I'm going to pass it on to you and share a little bit about you. Tell us about who you are, your context, and we'll go from there.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity, first and foremost. I've been a fan of yours when you were in the seat and before you were in the seat and after you were in the seat. So I just want to thank you for your service, because those are probably two words that as a superintendent you hear the least of. Thank you. So I want to thank you. Start off by that. So my story and why am I where I am and what did I do and how did I get there? Pues es importante decirles que cuando yo empecé la escuela yo hablaba puro español. Entonces mis padres, como eran bilingües, hablaban inglés y en español, pero hicieron la decisión que conscientemente que mi hermano y yo íbamos solamente a aprender español y que las escuelas nos iban a enseñar inglés. Okay, now hold on. Whoa, what are you doing? This isn't a bilingual show. And again, Sito, I don't want you to think that I'm being disrespectful to you or to any of our listeners that may not speak Spanish. But what I just demonstrated for you was what I experienced the very first day of kindergarten in Tucson, Arizona. I only spoke Spanish. And while the vast majority, or what do I know, maybe everybody's bilingual on this podcast, but my experience is that most people are monolingual English speakers when I do any kind of speaking. So I want people to experience what I experienced as a 5-year-old Mexican-American kid, second generation, Tucson, Arizona. My parents were both bilingual, Spanish and English speakers. They were fluently bilingual, but they made the conscious choice that they would only teach my brother, I have a twin brother, Ruben, that they would only teach us Spanish and trust that the public schools would teach us English so that we would be bilingual. We wouldn't lose our cultural heritage. We'd be able to speak to our relatives who only spoke Spanish, et cetera, right? The American dream, if I may be so bold, that's the American dream, right? So I wanted our audience to experience what I experienced as a 5-year-old, wanting to go to school, not knowing what it was, wanting to be involved, not knowing how to do it, and then not being able to have the language to be able to do that. Now, why do I do that? And why did I do that? Obviously, not to be disrespectful to you or the audience, but I want people to understand that's what we do in public education. And see, my parents didn't have the privilege of deciding, well, we're going to do a private school education. We're going to pay for exactly what we want. All they had was this dream that the public schools that they fund through their tax dollars
Right,
was
right.
going to help their children achieve the American dream, not anybody else's American dream, their American dream. That's the promise that we try to live up to every day
Yeah.
we walk into a public school, whether as a teacher, as a support person, as a principal, as a superintendent. That's public. I'm going to underline public education, not private, not bespoke. It's public. So I think that for me encompasses when people say, why didn't he just go along and get along in New York City and have a great experience as chancellor and just, wine and roses in New York City? I couldn't, because of the promise that my parents had with the public schools, because of what the public schools gave me. And
Right.
when I got into that chair and saw the incredible segregation, the incredible disopportunistic opportunities for students and families, I couldn't be in charge of that system and perpetuate those inequities and those unjust policies. So it gives you an insight as to like who I am, but at the very, very core of who I am, I'm that English learner 5-year-old that entered public schools with tremendous expectations, and most of the time they were met, and the times that they weren't, that's what I dedicated my career to, making those right.
Now, I can relate in a lot of different ways to this because, in my house, my parents were from Haiti, right? So we spoke French and Creole, and we learned English in school. So when I say I understand what you're saying, I understand deeply what you're saying. So let me ask you a couple of another set of questions, right? So you rose to lead the largest school district in the United States, right? New York City is the largest in the nation, right?
Yeah.
But to get there, you had to unlearn the idea that working twice as hard was enough, right? I would say, right? So that was just normal, right? When did you realize that in the boardroom, your excellence was being treated as a threat rather than as an asset?
Yeah, good question. So, look, at the time that I led New York City as chancellor, we were 1.1 million students, 1.1 million. We were the largest school city. In fact, if you think about the fact that the population in the United States is about 320 million residents. So anytime we were in session in New York City, 1 out of 300 Americans was sitting in one of our classrooms. That's how big, that's how massive that organization is. So it's the largest public school system in the world. Nobody's bigger than New York City. Now, that being said, we have certain expectations that we have about New York City. And one of the expectations is that that it is a bureaucracy, and it is. It's one of the agencies in the city of New York, not unlike the NYPD or the New York Fire Department or the Health Department. We're an agency. We're the education agency. Now, what did I have to unlearn? Well, what I had to unlearn was that even though New York City is a world-class destination city, I had to unlearn the myth that New York City had it all figured out. That if it wasn't happening in New York City, then it wasn't really happening anywhere. I had to unlearn the fact that even this world-class, and I believe that it's a world-class educational institution, has some things they have to change to truly meet the needs of all students. I had to unlearn that very early in my tenure as chancellor. The other thing that I had to unlearn was that, because I'm from the barrio, I didn't belong in the boardroom. And everything is hyper focused. So if I'm one of the first Mexican Americans ever to be the chancellor in New York City, well, then what's different about him? Because we got all kinds of Latino men around the city.
Yeah, I
None
was
of
gonna
them
say
were chancellor,
there's a lot of Latinos in New York City, like
right?
from all over the world, right? So
Absolutely. But again, I think this is a really important insight, my personal insight,
Mhm.
is that so I'm a Mexican American coming in as a chancellor. So you would think that the incredibly large Latino population in New York City would automatically say, oh, he gets us, he understands us, oh, he speaks
Mm.
Spanish, yep, he gets us. But no, because the Dominican community was, well, he's Mexican, he's not one of us.
Not
The
Dominican.
Puerto Rican community that way he's Mexican, he's not one of us. The you name it community that we all happen to speak language Spanish. We all happen to have very similar cultural references and heritage references. Yet, because I wasn't from Colombia or I wasn't from the Dominican Republic, there was this
Mm.
suspicion, just as if I wasn't Latino at all. That happens, and when I speak to my brothers and sisters in the African American community, that happens in the African American community
Yeah,
as
it
well.
happens all
It,
over. That's right.
it happens all over. So one of the things that I had to unlearn as well is, while I'm very proud of my cultural background, I had to unlearn that was the epicenter of the Latino culture. My
Yeah,
mom's
right.
tortillas, I make no apologies, center of the universe, brother. But I had to unlearn that it wasn't the thing that defines us as Latinos. And I really,
Yeah.
really made an effort to learn about my brothers and sisters, not only in the Latino Spanish speaking community, but in all communities of New York. And here's the thing, Sito, the more I got to learn about our communities, and especially our communities of color, especially our communities that historically have been underserved in a city like
Mhm.
New York City, the more amplified, the more motivated I was to change the system, because those communities have never been served well. They're not being served well, and we need to serve them well if we understand that 82% of the New York City public school students are students of color. In the largest school system in America, where 1 out of 300 Americans is sitting in one of the classrooms, if we don't get it right, then it's not that we're not getting it right for Black or brown kids. We're not getting it right for kids that are going to be the
Yeah,
future
yeah.
economic drivers of our country. So anyway, I could talk
You
about
know,
this all day.
what's interesting to me. Let me say this for the audience too, just to kind of clarify. I know we're talking about New York a lot, but you are also superintendent in Houston.
Yes,
You
sir.
also had other stops in other places of the country. So I would argue like your exposure and expertise is tremendous because you've engaged in multiple different types of communities in different states and cities. You know, I always look at the United States as like 50 little countries, right? I mean, I know in other places people say, but I tell folks it's like the dynamics different, and even within the state is different, right? Whether you're in the urban, suburban, or rural, right, area. And so
Absolutely.
it's this whole notion you watch when you become fortunate to become these level of positions, but we have to always try to disaggregate all those things just to get a kid to read, right? And so what the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I think so when you're talking about some of these things, you really understand the underlining issues in these spaces because you've seen how communities function. Would you agree on that?
I would agree. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
And it's interesting because when I went to New York City, and I know we talk a lot about it, it's the most recent, but when I went to New York City, just like when I went to Houston as the superintendent of Houston Independent School District, just like I did when I became superintendent in San Francisco Unified School District, I always started with what I call the listen and learn tour. And it
Mhm.
reminded me of what my mom used to say, Richard, just shut up and listen, right? Because you learn so much when you listen rather than think about how you're going to respond to what you're hearing.
That's
And,
right.
and
That's right.
so I always started with a listen and learn tour. And it was very simple, but not simplistic. What's going well? I want to know what's going well. What are we excited about in the district? And then I want to know, what could we do better? What are we not excited about in the district? And that always became the cornerstone of what my first 90-day plan was going to be in any district that I was in. No different in New York City. The complexity, though, in New York City was that it's hard to even describe for people how big the system is. But let me try. I used to remind folks that, every day we were in session, 1 out of 300 Americans is sitting in one of our classrooms. But then we have 5 boroughs in New York City. So I would remind people that we think about Staten Island as just one of the boroughs. We think of Manhattan as one, and Brooklyn, and then the Bronx, and Queens. So we think of them just everyday nomenclature. Yeah, it's a place. But if we were to actually cut Staten Island loose and make it its own public school system, and the Bronx their own, and Brooklyn their own, Manhattan their own, Staten Island would have been the 7th largest school district in America just by itself, just by sheer number of students. 7th largest. Brooklyn would have been number 3. It would have been bigger than Chicago in terms of sheer number of students, right? So if you think about that, the Staten Island being, in terms of population, the smallest borough, then you had literally 5 large urban ranked school districts all together as one, what we call the New York City public schools. So the challenge was, how do we ensure that the student that's studying in the farthest corner of Staten Island is getting the same high quality educational experience as a student studying at the very heart of Manhattan, the epicenter of the financial world? How do we ensure, in a system that large, that those 2 students that are public school students that are being supported by our public school tax dollars are getting the same high quality, I got to emphasize that, experience, no matter where their zip code is? Now, that example in New York City is absolutely applicable to the most rural school district in East Texas, to the suburban schools around Dallas, to the largest urban school systems like New York, LA, Chicago, Philly, you name it, right? That's what you're trying to do, as, from my very humble opinion, as a superintendent, ensure a high quality but a commensurate education for everybody in a public school system. That I don't know. That's my cross to bear sometimes, but it's my hill to die on.
Well, let's talk about something, because I have a couple of questions. When we found that, when you accepted to come on and we invited you to come on to the show, we were like, listen, there's a couple of things that we got to ask you. I had actually questions for days, but I had to group and categorize, because I'm like, we only got this much time to do it, right? So, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about workforce development. We'll talk a little bit about pipeline work and politics. I know you also doing a lot of things in that space. And then even we'll tap a little bit of the AI world, because, as you know, that we're living in this new world. So let's start a little bit with some data first, right? So in 2025, NAEP data showed that the achievement gap for Black and Latino students has widened to levels unseen in decades, right? And we've watched this over time. We spent billions, yet only 18% of Black 8th graders are proficient in math. And then also, even when you look at the Latino population, they started to they've always performed. It looks like they performed a little bit better than Black kids, but when you look at their counterparts, it still has not gotten better, right? And people are always talking about return on investment, dollars, and those things. Where do you think that? And I don't want to use the word we're failing kids, but where do you think that we're still having these challenges? Because when you talk to people who are investing, whether they're the feds, the business groups, whatever group there is, they use these metrics and say, well, we're not closing the gap, right? So we're spending money and da-da-da. And one of the things I don't understand, what I struggle to understand, that people don't understand, is like, not everybody's starting line is the same, right? And not everybody's community is the same, right? So like, if we all went to the same college and we stayed in the same dorms and we started to say it's not a problem with the same starting, it'd be a different conversation. But I struggle a lot because I can't understand the premise of what is hard to understand. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. So, okay. So I've, man, you got me fired up, Sito. So I have to give some antecedent data to understand what I'm going to say about this issue of the gaps getting bigger. Why do we even have a gap, etc.? Okay, because I think it's the primordial question that we get asked as system leaders. So number one, we have to, and by we, I say writ large, the body politic in the United States, in America, we have to come to terms with what we believe public education is about. What is it? Is it for everybody? Should everybody be educated or not? And I will tell you, when I toured schools in some other countries, I toured schools in China. In China, it's very clearly that public school is not for everybody. Some kids are going to get educated and some are going to get educated all the way to the university level, but not everybody, because we need street sweepers too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to be offensive. That was exactly what I was told by a minister of education, right? In the United States, I would say that's abhorrent to us. What do you mean we need street sweepers too? Nothing wrong with a legitimate work, that you're making a legitimate salary. Nothing wrong with that. But is that what I aspire my child to be able to do? Probably not. I want them to do something different, or something that will give them an ability to make a living and contribute to society, and not do it without killing themselves, right? So for us, the idea of public education really is for everyone, right? It really is for everyone.
That's
I
right.
would
That's
say
right.
I could go to any dinner party and I wouldn't get a drink, spilled in my face for that. Now, if we believe that, let's go back into history, because Thomas Jefferson wrote about public education when this country was very, very first being planned. And in 1779, Thomas Jefferson said that we should have, in this new fledgling democracy, a two-tiered system of education, one for the learned and one for the laboring. And that if we did this correctly, we might be able to rake a few geniuses from the rubbish. Now, just think about that for a minute. That meant that education wasn't for everybody. And although this was going to be a public endeavor, it wasn't meant to educate every single individual. That was what Thomas Jefferson wrote about. Yet at the same time, we have this juxtaposition that says, oh, but we want all children to be educated. Then we have this data that says, well, there is a gap between Black and brown kids and other Asian and white kids. And that gap, and we focus on the gap. So my question is, why are we always focusing on the gap? And my question is that if we believe that education is for everybody, yet the very fundamental infrastructure for educating in this new democracy Thomas Jefferson wrote about, it was for a two-tiered system, one for the learned, one for the laboring, then my question is, why are we trying to improve that system and then validate what we say are the problems with that system by data that summative has no idea what the formative path is for kids? And we validate and we say, oh, you see, Black and brown kids can't learn. So my question really fundamentally is, either we believe that Black and brown kids biologically, genealogically, historically, or physiologically, just they're incapable of doing well in a school system, because look, we have all this data. Or maybe it's that the system wasn't set up to really meet the needs of all students that we purport to want to educate in a public school system. So
this is why I got love for you, man. You tell the truth.
so I would say very humbly that the disconnect is not between what Black and brown kids are learning and not learning as compared to any other subgroup in the public school system. What I would say is that there's a gap in our understanding of what we want for public school education to be, right? And, policy is kind of, we got vouchers and we're giving people money to go to private schools rather than public schools. So it's kind of like, what's the beef with public schools? So that's number one. We've got to square what our expected outcomes are for public schools with what we actually are doing in public schools. Number two, this is my 38th year in education. My 38th year, yeah, I'm an old guy. My 38th year in education. Just once in those 38 years, I wish somebody would have said, you have an unlimited budget to meet the needs of the students that you have. Not the students that you wish you had, not the students that you used to have, the students that you have right now, with the homelessness, with the chronic absenteeism, with the multi-living situation. Some people don't have a living situation, working the 3 jobs, being pursued in your neighborhood by ICE agents. Like all of the factors, you have unlimited resources to meet the needs of those students that are coming to your school, right? Just once in those 38 years, we've never done it. So the second thing that I think is important is that we as a society have to understand that education, especially public education, is an investment. It's not a line item on a state budget or a national budget. We would never ever say, ooh, we have to make some significant cuts to the defense budget of the United States. We just have to get rid of let's get rid of let's get rid of 20 divisions of the Army. We're going to save some money. We would never say that because it's fundamental to our national defense. We have to be ready for what we don't know. I would very honestly and humbly pose it to our audience that education, public education, is the very cornerstone of our democracy. If we don't educate our next generation, what happens to our tax base? What happens to our economic drivers? What happens to the intellectual capital of the United States? AI right now is a United States phenomenon. We stop investing in education, you watch how quickly that phenomenon migrates to other shores. So again, I would pose it, and when you put it in those terms, people say, well, yeah, education really is very important. But like I say to other superintendents that I'm coaching, don't tell me about your strategy and your values. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your values are, because you don't value what you don't budget. So I would say to our audience, what do we spend on education? And when you say, well, that's a lot of money, do this very simple little investigative, because I've done it for every one of our states and our territories. How much is it per pupil that state invests in educating their K-12 students per pupil? And then very easily do the search of how much does it cost to incarcerate a juvenile for 1 year? So per pupil for 1 year of education, which is actually 9 or 10 months, and it versus the cost of incarcerating a youth, you're going to find that, for example, in the state of California, they were investing about $18,000 per pupil per student per year. The cost of incarcerating a juvenile was over $525,000. So it really is this question of is it a cost or is it an investment? And if it's an investment, can we afford not to invest? Just like we can't afford not to invest in the common defense, just like we can't afford not to invest in the public health. It really is a philosophical question that hopefully I get to ask some questions that make people think, well, what is he crazy? Or, well, maybe we haven't thought about it this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, everybody, we got Richard Carranza, former superintendent of San Francisco, Houston, and Chancellor of New York with us. We're super excited he's here. Let me go into, I'm going to ask you a cultural dynamic question, right? Because you pushed a lot to make sure that resources got to the most needed children, right? And also trying to attack biases, right? Which people now call identity politics. You know, you always feel like there's a different word of crazy that goes on now, right? But it's still all in the same category. So I know you've championed implicit bias trainings over thousands of staff members, and maybe people try to frame it to there. But what we notice, which the data always shows, that Black and brown kids were always 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts, right? Or peers that had the same type of infractions, which is it neutrally or actually a form of malpractice, would you say, on how that's happening? Because it seems that anytime you talk about race and suspension, those things, it's a very touchy subject in schools, even though to me the data is always very clear. Yeah.
So Sito, again, trigger warning for people that don't like to hear what my truth is, because this is my truth. Okay, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. So number one, I want to remind folks of what I said. Either we think that Black or brown kids, genealogically, it goes back in their history, biologically, a result of who their parents are and all their DNA, just can't perform or behave in a public school system. That's just who they are, their makeup. Either we believe that, and if that's what you believe, I'm going to very respectfully and deliberately ask you to do something else except education. But either you believe that, because then that makes sense why they act and why they perform and why they show up on the data, or maybe it's the systems and structures that Thomas Jefferson wrote about in 1779 haven't been formulated to help kids, all kids, if we believe that we want to educate all kids. And some kids are educatable and some kids are dispendable, right? I don't think we're in that space. So I'm going to assume the best angels of our American psyche, and we believe all students should be educated. Now, that makes it very important for us then to understand why are students in school in the first place. And what I would say is that for many students, not the students we used to have, not the students we wish we had, the students we have, for many of those students, the safest space in their world is a public school classroom with a well-trained, caring teacher. Now, and I would say that that's a matter of life and death. And I know some people are going to say, wait a minute, life and death? Come on, don't be so dramatic. I know you're Latino, Carranza, but don't be so dramatic. Well, let me tell you why it's a matter of life and death. Trayvon Martin. Now, people may or may not remember Trayvon Martin, but just a reminder, Trayvon Martin was a middle school student, and he happened to show up to school one day, and he wasn't prepared, so it fell into the category of willful defiance, which I think is one of the most egregious categories for discipline, but that's another story for another podcast. But he didn't come prepared. I don't know if he didn't have paper, he didn't have a pen, but he didn't come prepared. So the teacher referred him to the office. Sounds like it may be standard stuff that happens, should have been prepared. Goes to the office because Trayvon Martin was a frequent flyer in the principal's office. This went against their zero tolerance policy, so the principal was going to have to suspend him for the willful defiance. As part of the suspension, he asked him to empty his pockets, and Trayvon Martin had a small personal usable amount of marijuana in his pocket on his person. Now, as an administrator, as a mandatory reporter, as a licensed superintendent, I understand. Once that happens, you can't have contraband in the school. I understand that principal had to do what the principal had to do. So Trayvon Martin was suspended. He was arrested. And because he didn't come from a nuclear family where both adults live in the same house under the same roof with their children, because it was, a divorced household. And Trayvon Martin's, he lived with his mother. His mother had to go to work. She sent him to stay with his father in Florida during the duration of the suspension. Now, pause. The kid comes to class unprepared. That's willful defiance. As a teacher, I went to every conference, and to all the sponsors out there, thank you, because when you gave us pens and pencils and notebooks and paper and all of those things, I took that in my bag and I took it back to my classroom and put it in my drawer, because I knew that there was going to be days where kids weren't going to come with a pen or a paper, and I had it and I'd say, here you go. Number one, you don't get the excuse of not participating. Here you go. But number two, you may not want to tell me you don't have the money to bring a pen and paper. So here you go, right? So we all did that. But I understand the teacher had to do that. The teacher did what they had to do. The principal did what the principal had to do. Trayvon Martin goes to live with his dad, goes to get Skittles, and we know the rest. He meets up with George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman shoots him dead. So why is there a teenage youngster dead in Florida? Because he didn't bring a pad of paper or a pencil to class. The very system criminalized what may be a social environmental issue. And if we don't take the time to find out where our students are, where they're coming from, how's it going, we're not going to become their social workers. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying they're not going to want to know what you know if they don't know that you care. And I think that that's another thing that we have to talk about in this thing that we call public schools, aimed for this thing that we call all students, in an environment that says some students get more and some students don't, even in a public school system.
Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Carranza, former superintendent of Houston, San Francisco, and the Chancellor of New York, which are the largest school systems in the country, here with us today on Unlearned Unlimited Podcast. Richard, I'm gonna shift this a little bit because I got so much stuff. I'm trying to make sure we pack it all in to talk a little bit about AI and I call it the invisible workforce, right? So research shows that Black and Latino families are actually adopting AI at higher rates than their white families to bridge learning gaps. And people usually shock when they hear that, right? But it's a reality. Yet our school policies are often focused on policing AI rather than leveraging it. Are we about to create a new digital segregation where kids of color use AI for basic tasks while affluent kids use it for creation?
I sure hope not, because I would think we'd be adding a third point of demarcation under Jefferson's model of education, not only for the learned, not only for the laboring, and those for the uninitiated in AI, right? So I think that I hope we're not going to be creating that as part of the infrastructure of our public school systems. Look, I get it. And I know you do too. So, as a superintendent, you got to worry about everything. So what if student data gets breached, and what if it goes out there into the world, and then kids get targeted, or they get, invasion of privacy and the FERPA and the HIPAA. I get that. You have to worry about that as an entity, a governmental entity. However, we can't get so focused on that we lose track of the fact that the super vehicle called AI is on the international highway with no speed limit, and they're barreling down the road. We can't be that way station that says, "Oh, stop! We got to check your tags." Right? We need to be on that road while participating, while protecting our student data, while at the same time engaging in conversations about what are our community protocols around the use of AI. I was just, I'll tell you why this is important. I was just visiting classrooms in a school district on the East Coast, and I was blown away because in the teacher's lesson, and they were reviewing a paragraph that they had responded to based on a reading that they had. So they were looking for meaning. And as part of the question, the teacher had written and put in parentheses, if you checked if AI was consulted, cite the source. And I saw that and I'm like, wait a minute, did I see that correctly? Because I have never seen that where the teacher just says, yeah, if you used AI, just cite what AI you used, right? And then I thought to myself, boom, think about the endless conversations that teacher could have engaging those students. Really, so you chose ChatGPT. Tell me why you chose ChatGPT and you didn't choose the Gemini function. Really? Okay. And which one? Have you tried Gemini? Oh, you haven't? Here's what I'd like for you to do. Try doing the same process with Gemini and then compare the results from ChatGPT and Gemini. Would you mind sharing that tomorrow, letting us know how that goes? Because it'd be interesting. Think about that. Like, boom, those kids are engaged. They're learning 24/7. They're exercising their skill set. I, as a teacher who have never maybe used Gemini, might say to myself, oh, now I'm going to know which one should I use, ChatGPT or I mean, the connections are endless if we allow ourselves to think beyond the four walls or the four corners of a page or the four walls of a school.
It's funny. We got a middle schooler at the house in our home, and the other day, we always check her homework when she comes back, and I said to her, "Hey, did you do your homework?" She said, "Yeah, I got it done." And I said, "Oh, so what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I use ChatGPT." And I said, "So does mommy know?" She doesn't know. But I could summarize the books real quick. I could do this. And she's like, "I got A's." She go, and I started laughing, right? So now I was like, as the teacher, I mean, you learn the process, learn this. And
yeah.
But what dawned on me was that, they're moving much faster than we are, and they're problem solving. And so you're trying to figure out, like, hey, how do you help her to understand more? That's actually not a bad thing you did. You solve the problem, right? And so, but I think when you go into schools now, you see this battle that goes on, right? And you're like, if for what we're trying to accomplish, right? Especially now with everybody talking about, everything's moving to artificial intelligence, economically, jobs, those things, because just this morning you wake up, Amazon's going to let go this many people. Everybody's starting to think, well, you got these AI jobs are coming. If we don't start to think about it differently, it is going to really, really affect us. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you a little bit about was around workforce development, right? So we're training kids for a workforce that'll be 40% automated by 2030, right? That's what the reports are saying. If we don't change the industrial model of schooling in the next 24 months, are we essentially handing our students a diploma that is already antique, would you say?
It's expired on delivery. Absolutely. because, but let me tell you why. Because it does fit what, believe it or not, it fits what I was saying, right? So if we have a predetermined model of what education is, right? And all of the systems and structures support that pre-identified model. So I want to give you a visual. I want you to think of a car, an airplane, and a classroom. If you think of a car in 1900, you would have thought of, the Ford T model, right? It basically looks like, a glorified double scooter on wheels, right? That was a car. If you think of an airplane, it was, just a bunch of sticks and, the Wright brothers. And then you think of a classroom, you think of rows and nice straight rows and the teacher at the front. And it's a good classroom because the kids are listening. It's a good classroom because they're paying attention. It's a good classroom because the teacher's at the front of the room. I'm being a little sarcastic, but you'll understand why. And then think of those same three things in 1960, 40 years later or 60 years later. And obviously the car is now different. 1960, probably a Mustang. Air travel is much different. Now you got jets that transport passengers. When you think of a classroom, you're still thinking of an orderly classroom, rows, a teacher somewhere in there, kids paying attention. It's pretty much the same mental model. And then you go to today, you think of a car and you think of the electric vehicles, you think of a plane, you think of supersonic travel, and you think of the classroom, and by and large, it's the same mental model. So we're almost preconditioned to think of education a certain way, especially if in the face of all the evidence shows us that not only is the workplace going to look very different than we've ever prepared students for, but the way we work is going to look very different, i.e., you and I having this conversation when we're across the country from each other, right? I.e., the global pandemic that forced us to communicate and learn differently. So the workplace is going to look different. The way we work together is going to look different. And what I like to ask is, what is the currency to participate in that new reality? The currency is adaptable skills. That's the currency. Because no matter where you're working, no matter what you're working on, you're going to have to be able to work within a team with others around pursuing a specific goal or a specific project goal, right? So how do you work in a team? Well, you have to communicate. You have to have some empathy. You have to be able to be responsible, to hold up your part of the bargain. You have to have a collective effort. I don't know one teacher, one educator, one superintendent that's not going to say, that's what I want for every one of my children. When they graduate, I want the diploma to stand for that, not necessarily that they can do numeracy in record time, right? Or i.e., to your daughter or my daughter that say, hey, I want to look something up. I'm going to run it through Chat GPT, and they have enough accumulated background knowledge to know that when they see that response from that Chat GPT, they can put their what I like to call reality filter. In the hood, we called it some other filter, that they can put their eyes on that using that filter and say, yeah, that does make sense, or no, I don't buy it, right? And do further investigation. If we can get every one of our students to be able to graduate, and that's what that diploma stands for, I think we're now preparing them for jobs that we don't even know what they're going to be in 5 years. I think that's really got to be part of what we're looking at.
Well, I got a couple of more questions, and we're going to just do this thing called rapid fire, right? Rapid fire. I'll ask you some questions. I'll give you, you have to answer each of those questions with 5 words. Got it? 5 words. All right.
Got it.
But right before we get to rapid fire, I do want to ask you a question, because you do a lot of work around pipeline development around the country too. I noticed that you were part of the people of color building pipelines and those type of things. I saw somewhere. You went from a mariachi teacher. Well, I would say mariachi, but you played in the mariachi, right?
Yeah.
The teacher, and then you became the chancellor of New York City, our largest school system. What would you say, where is Richard Carranza of 2040 right now? Like, where do you think that you'll see years from now?
Wow, what a great question. I think, if the good Lord grants me those years, I think what you're going to see me continuing to do, and what I'm really really excited that I'm doing right now is helping to support the next generation of superintendents and even principals, in developing skill sets that are practical, that are uplifting,
Mm,
and that are really based in what my philosophy for education is that we have to create the environments for all students to be successful. So my goal, and what I want to be doing until I'm no longer here, is helping leaders understand how important that is, but then not only understand it, how to create it, how to build it into your systems and your structures, how to get the support of the public to make that happen, how to get the support of your board to make that happen.
mhm.
Coaching superintendents is really what I would say is my passion. Not because I always got it right, but because even when I didn't get it right, I can help others not get it wrong. So that's really my passion. That's what I hope to be doing, even into 2040.
And just for the audience, so we'll put Richard's information and also the organization that he has. So if any of the superintendents, I know we have a lot of superintendents, board members, and different folks that listen to our show, and even teachers as well. So you could be able to go into and reach out to his organization. He's around the entire country doing some great work, and so we'll put that in the handlers and everything. So let's get to rapid fire. Because I
Okay.
know we're running out of time, but I always like this portion because it gives me insight a little bit on the mindset and how you're thinking. So the goal is I'm going to ask you questions. You
Okay.
will only allowed to use 5 words, and the reason I'm actually giving you grace in 5 words. Usually I tell people you got 1 word, but sometimes I think it helps to see the process of how people are thinking about their framing their stuff. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Question number 1: what did you unlearn from going from a teacher to administrator?
I unlearned, that doesn't count. Um, I'm not always right.
Not always right. All right. Question number 2: you've been to a lot of different cities. What cities do you see, or what innovation that you see that cities are doing that they are adapting well to?
Community-based schools approaches.
Mm, mm. So you're seeing that a lot. Okay. Okay. Um, how about we go to this? I know this is in your wheelhouse. Advice for young leaders.
Sito? Sito?
Yeah.
Can you hear me
Can you hear
now?
me?
Yeah, I think we had
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
I think we had a little connectivity
You
issue
want me
there, right around the second question.
okay. All right. Let me ask again. Advice for young leaders.
And am I still under the
Advice for
five
young
word
leaders.
rule? The 5 word rule?
Yep. 5-word rule. Advice for young leaders.
Um, be yourself. You serve children.
Be yourself. You serve children. I know that's a tough one. I know that was a tough one. And then I'm going to ask you. Your last one would be, what do you feel that we should be unlimited about? And unlimited defined as innovation, solutions, those things. What do you feel that we should be unlimited about in this time?
We should be unlimited about the classroom. So the classroom. Um,
Mm.
can I describe why I said that?
Go ahead. Go ahead. You can describe it.
Okay. Just heads up, it's not going to be 5 words.
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
Okay.
That's all right.
Look, I think that the whole definition, I use the example of the 3 periods of time and then the 3 articles, right? The car, the airplane, and the classroom. That's a metaphor that we have to stop
Mhm.
thinking of the classroom as the 4 walls of a building, yeah, a building within a building, right? That's not the classroom, especially with the
Mhm.
technology that we have, especially with the digital natives that we're educating, especially with the ability for students to have access to technology ubiquitously throughout their day. Despite all that, we are a different place now in terms of the classroom. So if we think about our
Mhm.
community, our local community, our broader community as being the classroom, boof, think about the power in that. So
Mm.
that instead of, and remember, this is very much contingent upon, and with the why we have to stop thinking about expending money for education, but investing. So if part of the science
Mhm.
curriculum, every teacher has a budget every year where they get to actually do real world exploration projects. Okay, it goes to this notion of the community is the classroom. So instead of the students just talking about the photosynthesis process and looking at slides and looking at a video from the 1950s about what the photosynthesis process is, they decide they're all going to on one day get in a bus and they're going to go to the local park and they're actually going to go and capture images and they're going to capture environments of different plant species based on the photosynthesis diagram that they have, whatever it is. Can you imagine how that's going to turn
Mhm.
on some students because that's the way they learn? Can you imagine how that's for all students going to give
Mm.
them a better understanding of how they operate in the greater environment? That's an example of using the
Mm.
community as a classroom, and the benefits are innumerable. You get fresh air, you get students responsibly uh, behaving so they can go on this field trip, they get hands-on experience, all of the things that we know are good learning modules for students. But the point becomes that then what if they have, with the partnership we have with the university, those same students that are interested get to go and spend a day in a laboratory where they're doing experiments
Mm.
around photosynthesis and better growing agents, for example. Wow, you've just connected a whole bunch of other students in a different way amongst different content areas. Again, I could go on and on about why this is. So what I would like to see us do is uncouple the classroom from 4 walls in a building within a building.
Mm. And let me ask you one last question. Well, actually, I got 2 more questions, but
Sure.
um, for that part that you just talked about, taking away walls from the classroom. If you, and I'll just go back to that whole budget thing you talked about. If money was not an issue, right? Um, and you had to spend it in 3 different ways to get things to happen the way you see it fit in trying to move a system. What would be those 3 things?
So unlimited
Because there's
budget,
always competing priorities, right?
always competing priority.
Unlimited budget. Money's not an issue.
So I think I would I
Right.
would focus on 3 very very important buckets that I would say. Number one is mental health. I think it's the unspoken
Mm.
malady that we have, not only in society, but I think especially in our public
Mhm.
schools and especially post pandemic. I mean, when you think about it, we're 5, 6 years out from the pandemic. We are just starting to experience some of
Mhm.
that malady, the trauma from living in a global pandemic. So I would invest deeply in mental health, not only for student mental health, but adult mental health, those that work with students. And that means that we
Mhm.
would have, in the community schools model, you would have a place where students could get help if they didn't feel good. You would have adults trained in identifying what some indicators are that students are not doing well mentally. So we would create an infrastructure. We would have a place where parents could get support if they're not handling the stress or whatever well, so that there is a place where everybody can get the support that they need on demand as part of just being part of this educational community, right? So that would be one space that I'd invest deeply, because I think the benefits in terms of ROI, you would see in the attendance, you would see in the academic achievement, you would see in the participation, you would see in parent groups. I mean, you'd see it everywhere because people would understand school is the hub. The second thing that I would invest in is really in what I call the proper care of your staff. I think, and we've talked about AI, we've talked about technology, and I don't think, and I will always fight for people to understand that technology, no matter how good it is, will never replace a caring, passionate, well-trained adult in a classroom, developing those relationships, developing the I would say foresight in students to do what they don't think they can do. You'll never replace a well-trained, caring, passionate teacher in a classroom. Never. However, how do you take care of that well-trained, passionate, caring teacher in a classroom and keep them from, hey, they got to take care of their family. They got to pay their mortgage. They got to, pay their student loans. So the second bucket is not because it's a union issue or because I used to be a union member. No, we have to take care of the people that take care of our students. So I would invest in the compensation that we give teachers. We would pay teachers the professional salary that they deserve. And what does that look like? I think every community looks a little different, but I would say that at the minimum, a 30 to 40% raise for every teacher in every classroom would put them on par to the level and the significance of the work that they do. So immediately 30 to 40% raise. And then we stop piecemealing how we compensate teachers and educators. So for example, if you get higher degrees, you get certain salary increments for the most part. Well, yeah, you're earning those things. I can see that. But do you necessarily get credit for working in a very difficult school environment? So by that, I mean, there's a different kind of what we talked about earlier, right? So do you have certain things that you have to navigate in addition to being, a 10-year-old student going to school? So is there poverty? Is there homelessness? Is there a dysfunction in the family? Right? Whatever the case may be, if you work in that environment, with all due respect to my fellow educators, you know that it takes a lot of stuff, right? And perhaps many more personal hours. So do we compensate educators that choose to work in those environments and make a difference? Do we also recognize that effort, right? As a system, that's a great conversation to have. So I think the second bucket is really investing in the people, because we are a people business that take care of the clients, which are our students. And then the third bucket that I would invest in, and I would unabashedly invest in this, is around empowering parents and community. And let me tell you why I mean that. And I know some people are going to be shocked to say he didn't say a thing about curriculum adoption. He didn't say anything about, because we do that as a matter of what we need to do anyway. But these are things don't get attention. So why empowering parents? Look, because I don't believe in, I don't believe at all in parent engagement. I'm not a parent engagement person. And some people are going to say, whoa, what did he just say? He doesn't believe in parent engagement. Let me explain to you what I mean. It's very easy to engage a parent. Don't promote their child from the second grade to the third grade. You're going to engage that parent. Let me suspend your child for willful defiance for not bringing a pen or paper, and you have to come in and talk to me. I'm going to engage you, right? Don't let your student participate in the holiday play. I'm going to engage with some parents. So engagement is a very low bar in my mind. What we don't do well at large, writ large at scale in most school systems is help to empower parents. And the difference is this. In my 38 years, every parent that I've interacted that knew exactly what they wanted for their child, maybe didn't sometimes know what they wanted for their child, but knew who to ask and what to ask about how to help them get what they want for their children. All of those parents would be called privileged parents. Oh, they're so privileged. Well, what did that mean? That meant that their phone calls got answered. It meant that their emails got responded to. It meant that they got taken seriously because it was very apparent they knew how the system worked. They knew who was in charge of pulling different levers in the system, and they knew who to go to when their first answer was no. Those parents were, privileged because they had information and they operated in a way that other parents didn't. They just yelled or they just got upset. So my goal has been to how do we empower all parents to know how the system works, to know who to call, how to call, where to call, what to ask for, and if you need it in your own language, how to get that service. If you don't get a response, where to go to, right? We need to train, because if our parents know that and they understand the challenges that we have as well in ensuring that the system is working for all, then they're going to be our greatest allies. And I found that as a high school principal, that when my parent association knew everything I knew, within the bounds of confidentiality, etc. But they knew what I knew and knew what I was trying to do. There was an army that was behind me. It wasn't just me who was expected to advocate for my school. There was an army, not because I was whipping them up, but because they wanted to be in the same space I wanted, which was how were we serving their students, my students. So parent empowerment to me is where it's one of those last bastions where you definitely have parents that are empowered, that look a certain way, fit a certain characteristic, and other parents that have no idea about how to access the system, just trust people are going to do the right thing. If we can help empower them, they're going to hold us accountable. But I want parents to go to parent teacher night and not just say, oh, does little Sito work well in school? He doesn't get any trouble, right? He listens to you, right, Mr. or Miss Teacher? No, I'm raising Sito. I know he's going to behave well. What I want to know is Sito on track to know and what he's supposed to know when he gets done with third grade? Is he going to be good at the end of this? And how can I help you? Right? I'm not a teacher, but how can I help you, Mr. or Miss Teacher, helping me to make sure Sito is going to meet all those benchmarks he's going to be ready for the fourth grade. That's what I want our parents to be able to do when they come and they engage with us, right? Not are they behaving well? They better behave well because I'm raising them. Are they on track? What can I do to help? How are we going to work together? I think that's the missing component, of helping us make the promise of a public school, a high quality public school education for all. That's one of those missing components, I think, in helping us make that a reality.
Richard Carranza, ladies and gentlemen, the former superintendent of San Francisco, Houston, and the Chancellor of New York. Rich, I got one last question. This is going to be a personal question, okay?
Yes, sir.
What would you tell with all your life experiences, your success, people look up to all the great things you've done. And now that you have all this knowledge, if you had to tell your 25-year-old self something, what would that be? And you can say more than 5 words.
Oh, okay. I think that could be a superintendent torture exercise. You only have 5 words. Okay. I think what I would tell my 20-something-year-old self is don't be so busy keeping your job that you don't do your job. And funny, I said that to other people along the way as well. And by that, I mean this, when you're up and coming, you got a young family, you've got a mortgage, you're doing what you really love to do. So sometimes you're going to, they have a 0 tolerance policy. And if a student is 1 minute late, they're going to lock the door, and you enthusiastically do that because that's what the policy is, without ever stopping and thinking and asking, well, but why am I locking kids out? when they come to school, they want to be in my classroom. Why am I locking them out? You never stop and ask those questions. And you do it. Why? Because you want to be a good employee. And I'm not asking for a bunch of rebels out there. But so the reason I would tell my 20-year-old self, don't be so busy keeping your job that you don't do your job, because my job was always as a teacher to bring students in and get them uncontrollably hooked on learning. It may not be the social studies I'm teaching, but maybe they tolerate my social studies class because they really want to hear the stories that I'm telling that other students then say, oh yeah, I did that as well. Maybe it's the experience. And if I can get them hooked on the experience, then that's the antithesis of locking my door when it's 1 minute past the day. So anyway, that's what I mean. I would tell myself, start noticing what you're perpetuating, and don't be so busy keeping your job. You're not doing your job, and your job is really to serve the students you have, the ones in front of you, not the ones you wish you had, not the ones you used to have, the ones in front of you. I think that's why I would tell myself that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Richard. We really appreciate you taking time out your schedule to come out. Richard Carranza, former Chancellor of New York, Superintendent of Houston, San Francisco. His resume speaks for himself. We are super, super excited that he came to join us on Unlearned Unlimited. If you like our show, make sure that you share, like, subscribe. You'll see the subscribe button right there. Please click on that if you want to contribute to our show. There's a link there as well. We're going to send you, also put Richard's, you'll see in the description all of his organization. You can click on there. If you have any comments from him, you send that to us. We'll send that to him. And he's very, very easy to get in touch with. He's all around the country doing some great stuff. You can find us on all the social media platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, clips you'll see on LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. We're on the social media platform. Check out the long form on YouTube. Please make sure you check us out. As we shared with you, season 2, we're coming up with deeper conversations, deeper understanding, greater solutions with some of the best in the country, impacting whether it's in education, business, and all the different spaces. We appreciate y'all again. Unlearn Unlimited. Check us out. All right, another banger. Peace.
Unlimited, 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 unlimited.